Why does life keep repeating the same pain? Have you ever noticed how certain problems seem to follow you wherever you go? The faces change. The places change. The circumstances change. Yet somehow, the feeling remains the same. You leave one job because your boss doesn't respect you. A few years later, another boss makes you feel exactly the same way. You walk away from a relationship because you felt ignored. Then, somehow, you find yourself with someone who makes you feel invisible again. At first, it feels unfair. You begin to believe life is targeting you, as if fate has chosen a particular kind of suffering and attached it to your name. But what if that's not what's happening? What if life is not punishing you? What if life is teaching you? Most people spend years trying to escape discomfort. They move. They quit. They start over, again and again. But no matter how far they run, the same lesson keeps waiting for them on the other side. Because the lesson doesn't disappear when you avoid it. It disappears when you understand it. And until that moment comes, life has a strange way of repeating itself. The Stoics understood something most people never do. The obstacle is rarely the problem. The real problem is the person we become when we face it. And once you see that, everything begins to change. The man who kept running from himself. There was a man named David. From the outside, his life looked normal. A stable job, a decent apartment, a small group of friends. Nothing extraordinary. But inside, he was exhausted. Not because life was hard, because the same frustrations kept returning. Every few years, David convinced himself that a fresh start would solve everything. When work became stressful, he found a new job. When a relationship became difficult, he walked away. When a city felt limiting, he moved somewhere else. For a while, things felt better. Then, the same emotions returned. The same resentment, the same disappointment, the same feeling that nobody understood him. One evening, after another argument with his manager, David sat alone in his car long after work had ended. The parking lot was almost empty. The engine was off. The silence felt heavy. And for the first time in years, he stopped blaming everyone else. A strange thought entered his mind. What if the problem isn't the job? What if it wasn't the city? What if it wasn't the people? What if the one thing present in every failure was me? The question frightened him, because blaming circumstances is easy. Looking at yourself is not. That night, David realized something. He had spent years running from situations, but he had never stopped to examine the person doing the running. And that realization would become the beginning of everything. The Stoic teacher's question. A few weeks later, David met an older man through a mutual friend. He wasn't famous. He wasn't a psychologist. He wasn't a motivational speaker. Just a quiet man who seemed unusually at peace. They met at a small park one Saturday morning. David expected advice. Instead, the man mostly listened. For nearly an hour, David explained everything. His difficult bosses, his failed relationships, his bad luck, his frustrations. When he finished, the old man remained silent for a moment. Then he asked a single question. If the same pain keeps returning, what makes you so certain that life is the cause? David frowned. The question irritated him. Of course, life was the cause. People were unfair. Situations were difficult. The world was complicated. The old man nodded. Then he said something David would never forget. Life often repeats the lesson until the student is willing to learn. Silence. David didn't know how to respond. The man continued. You think your problem is rejection. Maybe the lesson is resilience. You think your problem is criticism. Maybe the lesson is humility. You think your problem is uncertainty. Maybe the lesson is trust. For the first time, David stopped arguing, because deep down, he knew something uncomfortable was true. The situations had changed, but his reactions never had. And maybe that was the reason the same suffering kept finding its way back into his life. Not because life was against him, but because life was still waiting for him to grow, the pattern he never saw. For the next few weeks, David couldn't stop thinking about that conversation. Life repeats the lesson until the student learns. At first, he dismissed it. Then he started paying attention, not to the world, to himself. And what he discovered was uncomfortable. Every time someone criticized him, he immediately became defensive. Every time he felt rejected, he withdrew and built walls. Every time things became uncertain, he panicked and searched for someone to blame. The situations were different. The reactions were identical. A difficult boss, a difficult partner, a difficult friend, different faces, same emotional script. David began noticing this pattern everywhere. At work, one negative comment ruined his entire day. On social media, a stranger's opinion could occupy his mind for hours. One unexpected expense would make him fear the future. It wasn't the events controlling him. It was his interpretation of them. The Stoics warned about this centuries ago. We suffer more from our judgments than from reality itself. That sentence hit David harder than he expected. Because if his reactions were creating part of his suffering, then perhaps he had more power than he thought. Not power over people. Not power over circumstances. Power over himself. For the first time, he stopped asking, "Why does this keep happening to me?" and started asking, "Why do I keep responding this way?" That question changed the direction of his life, the pain that became a teacher. The strange thing about growth is that it rarely arrives through comfort. It usually arrives through pain. And David was beginning to understand why. The challenges didn't disappear after his conversation with the old man. If anything, they seemed to increase. A promotion he wanted went to someone else. A close friend disappointed him. An investment lost money. Life continued doing what life does. The difference was that David started observing instead of reacting. When disappointment appeared, he asked himself, "What is this trying to teach me?" When frustration appeared, he asked, "What weakness is this exposing?" For years he had treated pain like an enemy, something to avoid, something to outrun, something unfair. Now he began seeing it differently. Pain was feedback. Pain was information. Pain revealed the places where he still depended on external things for peace. The respect of others, the approval of others, the certainty of outcomes. Little by little, he stopped fighting every uncomfortable emotion. Instead, he listened to it. And each lesson made him stronger. Not harder. Stronger. Because true strength is not the absence of suffering. It is the ability to face suffering without becoming its servant. David realized something profound. The events that once felt like punishment were actually preparation. Life had not been trying to break him. Life had been trying to build him. He simply couldn't see it before, the day he stopped fighting life. The biggest transformation did not happen on a dramatic day. There was no breakthrough moment, no sudden enlightenment, no perfect ending. It happened quietly. One ordinary morning, David was sitting alone with a cup of coffee, watching the sunrise. And for the first time in years, he felt no urgency to fix everything, no urge to control people, no urge to force outcomes, no urge to wrestle life into submission. He simply sat there, present, calm, aware. At that moment, he understood something the Stoics had tried to teach for centuries. Most suffering comes from arguing with reality. We want people to behave differently. We want circumstances to be easier. We want the future to unfold according to our plans. And when it doesn't, we suffer. Not because reality is cruel, but because reality refuses to negotiate. David stopped demanding that life obey him. Instead, he focused on what was actually his actions, his character, his choices, his attitude. Ironically, when he stopped trying to control everything, life became lighter. Not easier, lighter. The problems still existed, but they no longer owned him. And that was the freedom he had been searching for all along. Because peace does not come when life finally becomes perfect. Peace comes when you stop needing it to be. Life has a way of teaching the same lesson over and over again. Not because it wants to punish you, but because some lessons are too important to learn only once. Maybe, as you've listened to this story, someone came to mind. Maybe it was a difficult person, a painful memory, a disappointment you still carry. Or maybe you realize that the thing you've been fighting isn't really the situation. It's the reaction you've repeated for years. The Stoics believed that freedom begins the moment you stop demanding that life be different. Not because you lower your standards, not because you stop caring, but because you finally understand where your true power lives. Not in controlling events, not in controlling people, but in controlling yourself. The truth is, life will never stop testing you. There will always be uncertainty. There will always be criticism. There will always be setbacks. The goal is not to eliminate those things. The goal is to become the kind of person who can face them without losing yourself. So before you leave this video, take a moment and ask yourself one question. What lesson keeps appearing in my life? What challenge keeps returning in a different form? And, more importantly, what is it trying to teach me? Because sometimes the obstacle is not standing in your way. Sometimes the obstacle is showing you the way. If this message resonated with you, leave a comment below and share the lesson you believe life has been trying to teach you recently. Not the entire story, just the lesson. And remember, the pain may return, the challenge may return, the uncertainty may return, but once the lesson is learned, you will never be the same person again. Stay present, stay disciplined, and keep walking your path with honor.